CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, recently released his annual letter. Here's the breakdown. JP Morgan is the largest bank in the world. They move around $10 trillion daily in over 120 different currencies in more than 160 different countries, as well as a safeguard for $35 trillion in assets. If there's someone who understands both the state of the economy and the world, it's their CEO, Jamie Dimon. Jamie Dimon's annual letter is broken down into 5 main parts. 1. America and the world are at critical crossroads. 2. A compendium of critical domestic policies to help drive growth, innovation, and well-being. 3. Specific issues facing JP Morgan. 4. Management learnings. 5. In closing, to wrap it up. For the purposes of the overall market and economic outlook, I'm going to be focusing on parts 1 and 2. Part 1, macroeconomic picture of America and the world. Part 2, opportunities and challenges facing us domestically. Part 1, macroeconomic picture. The letter begins by giving us a general layout of the economic landscape. The U.S. economy stays resilient, consumers still spending, businesses are still healthy, but we have seen recent weakening before this letter and further weakening since. It is also important to note that the economy has been fueled by large government deficit spending and past stimulus. There remains a growing need for increased expenditure on infrastructure, something we heard from Larry Fink in his annual letter. There's also a growing need on restructuring supply chains and the military, all of which may lead to stickier inflation, therefore higher rates than what the market is expecting. Recent tariffs will likely increase inflation and increase the chances of a recession. Even with this recent sell-off in the market, it still remains expensive. On top of this, international adversaries and major competitors have made it clear that their goal is to dismantle American hegemony. But what has led to American dominance since the end of World War II? A large part is the system developed with our allies, think the Bretton Woods Agreement, and international organizations such as the International Monetary Fund and United Nations. This system has brought forward the longest period of peace and prosperity among the major powers. But it is clear today the system is in need of serious reform and strengthening, not total destruction. This may seem daunting and even scary, but it provides us with an opportunity to shape the world that we want. Therefore, we need to deal with the cold realities right in front of us. But we do face the most perilous and complicated economic and geopolitical landscape since World War II. War in Europe, terrorism in the Middle East, the ongoing development and consequences of Iran developing a nuclear weapon, fragmentation between Europe, ongoing trade disputes with China, just to name a few. But America has always had an amazing ability to confront and deal with enormous challenges. Therefore, we must stay strong through our values. The values that have made America the envy of the world and the best place in the world to invest. Our exceptionalism is based on our freedoms, our liberty, our opportunities, and our rule of law, all under protection of our Constitution and the power of the U.S. military. America is still the exceptional nation, but its problems demand we adjust our strategy. It's time to rebalance and rebuild, but not retreat from the post-world order. Therefore, a retreat from international leadership from America could leave a void that is filled by China or another country with alternative values and norms. The best strategy for America's success is to implement effective domestic policies that drive robust economic growth for all citizens. By enacting meaningful policy reform to resolve the issues we face, GDP could have grown at 3% versus the 2% rate that it grew over the past 25 years. Had it grown at 3%, we would have an additional $16,000 per person in GDP this year. Therefore, policy needs to be detailed, comprehensive, and coordinated to be successful. Well-intentioned policy can backfire. Smart policy can accelerate development. Policy done right is both important domestically and internationally. We need comprehensive foreign economic policy to win the global economic war. Our adversaries want fragmentation between us and our allies, which could be disastrous in the long run. But we don't have to fear our adversaries like China. We just have to get our act together. Therefore, promoting healthy economic alliances is key, and this includes fair trade. Now, there are many ways to combat fair trade. Industrial policies, like tariffs, for example, is just one way to combat fair trade, but it must be done right. Trade deficits by nature, they're not good nor bad. Our trade deficit over the last 20 years has totaled over $12 trillion. This is probably too much, but on the other side, we have a surplus of investment, therefore resulting in foreign investors owning $30 trillion in securities versus U.S. investors owning $16 trillion in securities. One competitive advantage that makes America so attractive is our energy position. We are self-sufficient in energy, and we will be for decades. However, the key competitive advantage that the US has is the US dollar as the reserve currency, something also mentioned by Larry Fink. The US dollar is so strong because it is issued by the Federal Reserve, who owns US Treasuries to support each dollar that it issues. Those assets are backed by the full faith of the US government, which is backed by the taxing power of the most prosperous nation the world has ever seen. Furthermore, the US dollar is so strong because of our open markets, strength of our economy, and rule of law upholding property rights, all of which are protected by the US military. Now, part two. Opportunities and challenges facing us domestically. One of the key issues domestically is that the government needs to demonstrate that effective, efficient, competent, and principled as any institution should. This includes developing policies that are conducive to maximizing long-term growth, jobs, competitiveness, and fairness without micromanaging the economy. Like all institutions, the government should continuously prioritize and allocate resources to streamline operations, reduce red tape, to improve service delivery, enhance response, and achieve cost efficiencies. Not focus on the amount of money that we throw at the problem, but what the outcomes actually are. But instead, we have a broken bureaucracy that fails to acknowledge or effectively deal with our biggest problems. Therefore, it becomes easier to throw money at a problem rather than craft good policy or fix the supply side issue. Good supply side policies such as job creation, infrastructure development are critical to achieving prosperity. The government also needs to account for investments like infrastructure differently than it would account for expenses. The basic lack of proper accounting in the government is astounding and laughable. We need to understand proper accounting to save the US taxpayer their hard-earned money. But speaking of taxes, there's huge reform needed. Taxes should incentivize growth and innovation. Two examples here: deductions in capital expenditures, deductions in research and development, both of which are proven ways of growing the economy and generating jobs. The tax code plays an important role in raising those up from the bottom of the economic ladder. But there are two other key areas that should be in focus as well. One, the education system. Two, the healthcare system. Beginning with the education system, there are 5 main points. 1, we need to refresh our country's workforce training system and teach people skills that will actually lead them to high-paying jobs. 2, higher education costs too much and is insufficiently linked to proper outcomes. 3, early childhood education is critically important and a long-term investment. 4, all students should receive some type of basic financial education, and this is something we could not agree with more here at Jump for More. 5, teaching health and well-being in K through 12 would benefit all citizens, something we could also not be more in favor of here at Jump for More, and really common sense policy. Now, the healthcare system. We have the best doctors, best pharmaceutical industry, best hospitals, best medical devices, and the list goes on. But our outcomes are not good. Jamie Dimon lays out 4 policy changes. 1, healthcare data should be tabulated in a consistent way across all healthcare organizations and providers. 2, all healthcare data should belong to the individual and be transferable and not used for unauthorized purposes. 3, increasing transparency for both the companies and the patients is essential, ensuring clarity about the cost of care. 4, healthcare would be more affordable if exchanges were national and offered broader range of insurance options. A healthy population is key to a prosperous nation. Some studies show over the past 25 to 30 years, healthier workers and participation of an older workforce accounted for 45% of productivity. But there is another area that needs to be addressed that is significantly holding back productivity and growth. That is regulation. We can improve effective regulation while reducing crippling rules, demoralization, and arbitrary and expensive litigation. But we have gotten to the point where we barely talk about improving our regulations. We only talk about adding more, therefore contributing to endless, mind-numbing, and demoralizing bureaucracy. This is another key area that was brought up by Larry Fink in his letter. Studies show that the cost of our regulations, which we do have to note, do have some productive outcomes, add up to $3 trillion annually. These excessive regulatory and litigation costs result in higher costs across the entire economy, including infrastructure, utilities, education, and other essentials. The worst part, excessive regulations excessively hurt small businesses and they reduce competition. Minimizing red tape would make it easier, cheaper, and faster to build key infrastructure like schools, roads, and homes. Building a more affordable housing supply is a key issue that needs to be addressed today. We have a housing supply issue, and it is important to increase funding for effective, affordable housing production programs. But key regulation needs to be addressed in building mortgages, and consistent local zoning requirements. Fundamentally, we need a dynamic regulatory structure for both growth and innovation. One key regulation that can support growth and get more liquidity into the economy is the regulation on banks. Banks used to lend out nearly 100% of their deposits and now are limited to 70%. Before the financial crisis, banks had less than 15% of their assets held as liquid assets, which are now as high as 30%. The financial crisis changed a lot of regulation here, which was well-intentioned, but banks now just have this capital sitting idle where they could put it to better use to help drive the economy without creating additional risk. Therefore, our goal should be in creating more liquidity in the system and more clarity in resolution. Eliminate most bank runs and reduce the cost of any bank failure. Increase the amount of credit while lowering its cost, simplify regulation, and improve access to banking. If these rules were properly modified, JP Morgan alone would be able to extend hundreds of billions of dollars annually in extra lending. But another area in finance we need to address is the improvements to the retirement system and promoting public markets. Again, as Larry Fink noted in his annual letter, most Americans are not set up for retirement. We should make investment as easy as possible for everyone. But the public markets have been shrinking dramatically, and regulation should encourage rather than discourage companies to go public. In closing, Jamie Dimon notes a lot of current issues, both domestic and foreign, but he also lays out opportunities and paths to correct the flaws in our system. Annual letters from great CEOs of great companies are so important to keep us informed and give us a boots on the ground view of what is really happening in the economy and the market. As investors, these letters, earnings calls, investors days go a long way in helping us shape the picture of the markets and develop a plan for action. Again, capital markets are an amazing gift that we have access to, and the action is to get into the game. Be invested in the market or great companies over long periods of time. Our goal and mission here at Jump for More is to help drive that forward. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below, like the video if you found this letter interesting, and subscribe for more. As always, these are just my opinions, not investing advice.